From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, K-State's Glynn Tonsor covers the cattle market scene for us this week. He'll comment on the perception of weakening domestic beef demand that led the cattle futures market to drop off late last week. And Glynn talks about his recent budget analysis on how deep into 2018 one should retain their backgrounder calves. Then K-State's Dustin, Pendell, and Jisang will discuss their new study of crop insurance and its influence on farm survival in tough economic times. And for this week's 4-H segment, from the Kansas 4-H Foundation, Jake Worcester will talk about how end-of-year contributions can support 4-H activities in Kansas. Plus more coming up on this Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
And for openers, our cattle market segment for the week. Alongside once more is livestock economist Glynn Tonsor of K-State Research and Extension, with a tale of two markets in some respects here, Glynn, as we look at last week's trade. The futures market reversed its direction at late week, but the cash market did fairly well overall.
Yeah, so I would agree. We ended the week going in different directions, but the tone was similar earlier in the week. Let's go to the cash market first. As Fed trade, we actually ended Friday at about 120.5. That was up about $2 for the week. And when we look over to feeder cattle, depending on which market I'd quote around the country, I'd say we were up about $5. There's a couple flat, actually a couple of cases at $10 up. The feeder cattle auctions that were Monday through Wednesday were pretty much across the board all up. Those later in the week weren't up quite as high. So the cash market, we had a nice week on balance, but that was not matched, as you said, on the board. So we closed the week down $1.50 on the December live cattle contract at just over 117, and then the nearby January feeder cattle contract was down about $3 for the week at just over 150. Most of that pullback was on Friday, actually. So that leads me to speculate a little bit about, did the futures see something at the end of the week that isn't embedded in some of those cash numbers I noted? And the commentary around Friday's trade was, have we already had the run on holiday purchases? So, this is the time of year that we have a pre-advanced purchasing of beef for Christmas featuring. And I think there's just some unknown and concerns that maybe that part of the positive demand story might already be behind us. And if that was the case, we would see some pressure on cutout. And indeed, we saw that as the week ended. So the choice cutout actually broke 206, down $5 for the week. Select cutout was 183.61, down $4 for the week. And as I alluded there, we saw towards the end of the week the cutout coming down even stronger than the animal side that I shared a moment ago. I want to highlight also, though, there's kind of a mixed bag in those cutout numbers. Is yes, they came down towards the end of the week. That's still a choice select spread that's $22, and that's a very large number. So for this time of year, we typically increase the choice select spread. It really kind of hits towards the bottom around August, and we're coming up leading into this holiday purchasing. So it's not uncommon for it to be going up, but the fact that we're at $22 is notably higher than normal, and leads me to speculate that I think there's two things going on there. One is we do have some higher slaughter numbers going, so if embedded in that we have more select product coming, that's going to depress the select side of that margin. But the other side is, if the positive demand story we've been having for some time is on quote-unquote higher quality beef, that at the same time will pull up that choice side. So time will tell if this holds, but I will monitor. The choice select spread at $22 here at the very beginning of December does stand out compared to normal trends.
Well, how pivotal on the demand side is this very week ahead of us, the first full week of December, toward that end then, is determining what will happen ahead of Christmas with beef demand?
Yeah, I think it's very, very critical. So it's always easy to talk about what might happen instead of, putting your money on it. But over the next 10 days, we're going to kind of come to an end on whatever that holiday buying is, and we may have already hit it. The market, in some sense, on Friday was signaling the pull down is concerned we've already hit it. In the event the cutout is down more this coming week and that the board and cash trade follows it, in the absence of something else, I'm going to sit here a week from now saying, okay, all that pre-holiday buying is in, and now we got to hope we don't continue to, I don't want to say crash, but decline in this market in December because there's not a clear demand signal, right? Another holiday event or something like that between now and the end of the year. So my cautious hope is that there is still some holiday buying to be had, whether that is consumers that are going to buy more than we anticipated or they're going to respond stronger to those features or whatever that might be as the actual holiday event occurs. Those that are actually institutional buyers, right, are the ones that are buying in advance of that, and that's really what we're watching right now. I can kind of tell it both ways, but I really think the tone of 2017 is going to be set this coming week because we're going to know what that domestic demand story is for the rest of 2017. Profitability for the year isn't set in the last month, of course, but the tone of the year is dictated by the last couple of weeks, and that carries over into 2018.
When we look at the feeder cattle market once again, you've put together some information on price spreads there that may be instructive as far as how one might manage their feeders.
Yes, so I think it's good to put on a historical context and then also just remind ourselves, and this calf yearling spread is something that cow, calf, and stocker enterprises are always managing. We're sitting here early December, and one of the decisions here has already been made. Most people have already made their decision whether to retain or not. But even those that now own a calf with the intent to sell it sometime in the spring, they could alter if they sell it in February versus March or March versus April or whatever. There's still room to adjust that decision. Just because you're embedded in that enterprise doesn't give you a final firm date on the sale date. And the reason I highlight that is James Mitchell's a PhD student here at K-State, worked with me to pull together kind of a history of what is the spread between the November calf and the March yielding price over the last roughly 15 years, and how is this year, the one we're in right now, kind of compared. And we have a fact sheet on Ag Manager. I encourage folks to go look at it if you want the more details. But the punchline would be from June of 17 until about now, the spread between the November and the March contracts continued to narrow. And what that means is that basically the price premium on a calf relative to a yearling was shrinking, and that encourages somebody to invest and take on the risk of, basically buying into producing that yearling. And we saw that throughout October and November was basically the market signaling for somebody, and if there's a cow-calf producer who's interested to retain their own. I'm mainly highlighting that, A, just to call attention to this resource. I want people to read it and make use of it. But the second part would be is embedded in there, again, is our use of the beefbasis.com resource. I encourage those that are in that enterprise with an intent maybe to sell in March a yearling, maybe to push the pencil, and maybe it makes sense to sell in February instead or April instead. Just because you've initiated that enterprise doesn't mean that final decision is set, and I encourage people to keep doing that homework.
So look at that. If, in fact, you've retained those calves, you want to maximize what profits might be available. That's good information to check out on agmanager.info. Glynn, you bring to our attention more information that actually originates out of Oklahoma State University and colleagues down there, including a frequent guest here on this broadcast, Daryl Peel. It looked at steak size and how that ties into the demand equation. What is the drift of this? Yeah, so this study was motivated by, most of our listeners are well aware of animals are much larger than they used to be, to the tune over the last 40 years. I think there's over a 300-pound increase in carcass weights, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I could give a long story behind that. But one of the key outcomes of that is we have much larger steak products than we used to. But we also have more pounds of ground beef where there's not really a downside of larger carcasses. So what this article gets at is specifically what are consumer preferences for steak size. And they find on average a U.S. consumer would prefer a thicker but less surface area steak. So think one that's kind of, fit between your hands, like I don't want to say baseball, but think baseball size, so thicker and shorter that way, as opposed to thinner and fill the plate. And why is that relevant? As you have a bigger and bigger carcass, retailers have to think about what kind of product they buy and how they cut it and how they put it in front of consumers. And this is the kind of thing that's embedded in a much bigger discussion about whether or not we're producing too big of animals, whether or not cow size needs to change. There's a lot of things to this. I highlight it today for one main reason. One is to give credit to a study that I think is overdue, and some of this thing needs to be vetted out more, so I want to call attention to that. Daryl Peel is a regular visitor here, so I want to give him credit for that as well as one of the co-authors. But the second part would be is the deeper economic point on you can have a technology, and there's actually a host of technologies that lead to larger animals, and there's a lot of trade-offs embedded in that. There's no doubt that there's a ground beef side benefit because we produce more ground beef and it's cheaper per pound than it would be if we had smaller carcasses. That's pretty much certain in my mind. So that's a definite benefit for consumers.
What's less of a definite benefit is the steak size implications. So this study highlights the fact that at least some consumers would be better off if we were offering different size steaks, or maybe we come up with different technologies to prepare that and cut it differently and those kind of things. So this whole issue about economics is not simple. Applies here. You can have net gain of larger animals, and yet some beef products we may be having a demand hit from because we might be offering it in a form that's not ultimately desired. Mm-hmm. I don't think this is the death knell for steak demand. I don't want anybody to take it that way. Rather, I just want to highlight this kind of trade-off between certain technologies can be a definite win for ground beef and maybe not other products is embedded in this story that we produce a whole animal, and then we have lots and lots of products that come from it, and no one person in the world eats those products in equal proportions. So the heterogeneity that's embedded in that of what aggregates up to total beef demand is a complex story that I'm always harping on, and I like this particular study of giving us some more insights on that steak size piece. So those that are interested in it are welcome to contact me or Daryl Peel or the other co-authors, Josh Maples at Mississippi State and Jason Lusk, who's now at Purdue University, would be happy to comment on, I'm sure.
But indeed, this is something that is managed in part and not in small part on the hoof, so it's more fodder for the dialogue on providing that product that the consumer prefers. Interesting work indeed out of Oklahoma State. Lastly, Glynn, you'll be on the circuit along with your colleagues from Agricultural Economics for those 4 Farming for the Future meetings that K-State Research and Extension will be putting on. 2 of those later this month, 2 of them in January, and you, of course, will be talking market outlook there.
Yeah, so I encourage folks to go to our Ag Manager website to get the brochures. The exact dates and locations are all laid out there. That particular program has a little bit more of a long-run focus. So I will be there providing what I call a immediate outlook, Q&A presentation, but I will also have an extra focus on what the next 10 years look like. Not that I claim to have every number figured out over the next 10 years, but I'll be sharing a host of USDA's numbers on that front, commenting on them, and embedded in that as well, which is timely, I think our listeners will appreciate, is clarifying the current importance of trade, where USDA thinks that's going in the future, and if I'm effective, dispelling some myths on, the role of trade in the market.
Very good. Those are taking place quickly. Pratt, December the 14th, Salina, December the 19th, Scott City, January 10th, Emporia, January the 11th. All the pertinent information on the Farming for the Future meetings on agmanager.info. As always, a pleasure, Glynn. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
This week's cattle market commentary from Glynn Tonsor, livestock economist, K-State Research and Extension. And you're tuned to Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Agriculture Today returns now here on the K-State Radio Network. There's been quite a bit of banter over the last several months about the future of the crop insurance program, what with the deliberations on a new farm bill going on. And there's a major question about crop insurance and its influence on farm survivability that was answered in a recent research project conducted by our guests now, K-State agricultural economists Dustin, Pendell, and Jisang Yu were involved in this. Dustin, you've been listening to the discussions about crop insurance and the future of it, frankly, and its importance. What was the real impetus behind this project?
Well, there's a few things. As you mentioned, the political climate, starting with the Farm Bill. It's being discussed currently, and back, must have been last February, you had Senator Pat Roberts and Debbie Stabenow were here on campus to hold their first public hearing talking about the Farm Bill. And during that meeting, they had a number of producers representing the various groups. And one thing that, when I was sitting in the audience, one thing I noticed that kept popping up was the theme or the mention of crop insurance. They kept talking about the importance of it and the safety nets. And then must have been 2 or 3 months later, back in May, President Trump proposed the budget cuts to the USDA, and of that, I believe it was a 36% proposed cut in the federally subsidized crop insurance program.
This with the backdrop that agriculture has become heavily reliant upon crop insurance as a risk management tool, with that coverage significant, of course, right?
Yes, if you take a look over the last 2 decades, the U.S. federal crop insurance program has rapidly expanded to cover almost 300 million acres of farmland with crop insurance.
The question, though, is how important is it when financial times are a little bit rougher out there for agricultural producers, crop producers in this case, and questions that really, Jisang, haven't been answered directly through empirical research apparently up to now, right?
Yeah, that is true. And most of the crop insurance literature focusing on the demand for crop insurance, and there's a big literature on how we rate the product, and there's some on input use, but there's very few on farm survivability and its impact of crop insurance on that. And partly the reason was the data was not out there for such a job. And for our cases, luckily, we have a Kansas Farm Management Association data we're using that enables us to do some analysis on how the crop insurance affect the farm survivability. And
we'll get into how you went about this, but there seem to be two camps of argument on the impact of crop insurance, whether it in fact helps producers in sustaining their operations or whether it's a cash flow mechanism in a lot of respects, right?
Yeah, that's true. And the literature did not plug into explicit about farm survival, but there is one argument saying that this is just the transfer of some taxpayers' money to farms. And there's another argument also which suggests that crop insurance is a tool for farm safety net and risk management.
So you're trying to lend some clarity to that discussion with this research. You utilized Kansas Farm Management Association data here, and you used a period of time back in the mid-'90s where you could actually make comparisons with and without crop insurance and how farms reacted. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true. And so the period we're looking at the farms we're looking at is the farms who bought the crop insurance in 1995 and the farms who did not bought any crop insurance in 1995. And the reason we choose 1995 is that in 1994, crop insurance was mandatory for every farm to be eligible to get the commodity program payments. And that mandatory provision got lifted in 94, and that gave us some sort of natural experiment to see how the farms who opt out from crop insurance program behave differently as opposed to farms who stayed in the program.
Because within that time frame, there was probably minimal change in the orientation of the farms or the influences impacting the farms broadly. Is that correct?
Yes, and also we could minimize the fundamental difference between the farms with crop insurance and without crop insurance by just looking at one-time opting out decision, and we use some econometrics method to match those two groups of farms to make it similar before crop insurance opt-out decision. That makes them very comparable units, and we can identify the impact of crop insurance on farm survival years.
And following up on that, how do you determine or identify farm survivability or farms, in effect, exiting the business? Dustin?
So, yeah, it's a good question and something that we need to clarify. So in this study, we defined a farm exit not as a farm might have exited out of agriculture altogether. We define it as a farm that's not actively participating in the Kansas Farm Management Association for more than 2 years. So maybe they were a part of the Farm Management Association, but for some reason they dropped out for 1 year, 2 years, and they came back in. So that was how we defined a farm exit. It wasn't necessarily a farm exiting all of agriculture, whether they bankrupt or retired or something like that. So I think that's a good question, a good point that we need to clarify.
Getting at this required the employment of some rather intricate econometric models, which we won't go into in explicit detail here. But you put these models together and made a host of comparisons and tried to come up with some sort of trends. What did you find out about the impact of utilizing crop insurance, having crop insurance in place, and whether or not that helps a farm endure the more difficult economic times?
So there were a number of different methods we used to look at this, investigate this. And what was nice is all these different methods kind of got at the same thing, the same result. And then so in one particular method, we looked at, again, looking at farm survivability of those two groups who purchase and who don't purchase crop insurance. And one of them suggested the survival rates were higher for farms that purchase crop insurance, implying that farms that purchase crop insurance were more likely to stay in the Kansas Farm Management Association longer, which suggests that there was a positive effect of crop insurance on farm survivability.
And in fact, Jisang, you even identified a length of durability of the farms that had crop insurance, 7 years longer compared to those that don't have crop insurance?
Yeah, so that's our mostly preferable specification is suggesting, and that's want to be a bit careful on that. We would like to give that number 7 years as a preliminary result, but at the same time, this kind of identification is very sensitive to other variables that we could use at the same time. But, it's a pretty robust in that range of 6 to 7 years. And one thing I would like to point out is that without using any complicated econometric method, we have to notice that the crop insurance participants tend to be larger, younger, and some systematic different characteristic. And we use different methods to make them comparable. And so that 7 years are coming from that specification. So if you're not doing that very well, then we could over or underestimate the impact of crop insurance, which even without using the sophisticated method, we see that 3 or 4 years impact from the crop insurance. So it's still in a range of same directional suggestion that we have.
And that's an important recognition here that there are other variables in the mix that work towards an individual's risk management apart from crop insurance. You did account for market contracting, government programs, off-farm income. All of those things were considered here, correct?
Yes, in some ways, like not explicitly including in our model, but we're trying to make the fair comparison between the crop insurance participant versus non-participants. So that is what we're trying to do, be more careful on that. And some others can argue with different variables or economic factors might affect the 7 years or 70% higher survival rate, but
it doesn't take away from the conclusion that crop insurance is a major, major contributor to survivability. So how do you hope this information will be utilized from here, Dustin?
Well, from here, we've said it's one of the first studies because data limitations. And so we hope that, there's right now, as we pointed out earlier, with this political climate, all this discussion surrounding the Farm Bill, hopefully this will help policymakers in making better informed decisions.
It underpins the idea that crop insurance is vital as a risk management tool then.
Yeah, as a risk management tool, correct.
This is posted, by the way, on the agmanager.info website out of K-State, and it's good reading, and it clarifies a very important question that has been out there about crop insurance, just exactly what direct impact can employing crop insurance have on the ability of a farm to endure difficult economic times. And this took a lot of work to get at this particular information, so congratulations to the both of you for doing just that, and we appreciate you being along with us and outlining what you found out today. Jisang and Dustin, appreciate your time.
Thank you, Eric.
Agricultural economists Jisang Yu and Dustin Pendell of Kansas State University authored this work. Take a look at it once again at agmanager.info. It's informative and instructive reading, to be sure, on the value of crop insurance to agriculture. And you're listening to Agriculture Today. We'll be back in a moment on this, the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Moving ahead now with today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, a Brazilian meat executive caused a stir late last week when he told Reuters that his company was getting ready to resume exports of fresh beef to the U.S. as early as the first quarter of 2018. USDA officials, however, have dismissed the idea as inaccurate and stated again that they've never given a time frame for when the ban would be lifted. The USDA, you'll recall, suspended imports on June the 22nd when a government audit discovered food safety deficiencies in the wake of Brazil's inspection scandal. Carmen Rottenberg, who is the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service Acting Deputy Undersecretary, said that the department is still waiting for Brazilian authorities to provide information on how they've resolved concerns that caused the ban to be imposed in the first place. According to Rottenberg, at this time, it's not possible to estimate when the ban may be lifted, because even when Brazil provides the additional information, the agency will likely still have to conduct a verification audit. Rottenberg's comments come in response last Thursday in a report by Reuters in which the CEO of Minerva, Fernando Galletti, indicated that that company expected to resume fresh beef imports to the U.S. in the first quarter of the new year. This is not the first time that Brazilian officials have given overly optimistic estimates about when the suspension would be lifted. And another leading USDA administrator reaffirmed that the U.S. is not ready to resume importing Brazilian beef just yet. More on that from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA's Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Ag Affairs, Ted McKinney, says the U.S. is not yet ready to resume imports of beef from Brazil, which he visited at the end of September.
We had discussions on the Brazilian beef issue in every meeting with government official, and I think with most of the other meetings.
He says the quality of the Brazilian meat still did not meet the standards of USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service.
The latest round was to inspect how they had done, how they're doing in their equivalency. That's the word that's used. Are they following equivalent processes as we have in the U.S. to make sure that the beef coming in is safe?
He says he knows the U.S. decision is disappointing.
But they also know that it's a free market here. It is not a case of a false trade barrier at all.
He says the question is not if the U.S. will resume Brazilian beef imports, but when. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And one day after the latest renewable fuel standard volumes were made public, a federal lawmaker asked Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt to conduct studies on whether the RFS is harming the environment. Senator John Barrasso, a Republican from Wyoming, said in a letter to Pruitt the agency has dropped the ball, he put it, on conducting RFS environmental impact analyses the agency is required to complete, especially with respect to air quality. Barrasso is the chairman of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. Also last week, Reuters reported that the president is set to grant a meeting with lawmakers and others from oil-producing states to discuss their concerns about biofuel policies. In response to Barrasso, Renewable Fuels Association President and CEO Bob Dineen said in a statement to DTN the industry has nothing to hide. Dineen said he believes the EPA should complete the agency's congressionally mandated studies on the environmental impacts of the RFS and believes the results will confirm that biofuels like ethanol offer enormous environmental benefits. Though unsure about Barrasso's motives for the request, Dineen said that ethanol and the RFS have in fact benefited the environment. He said ethanol replaces toxic gasoline components, including benzene, reduces tailpipe pollutants such as carbon monoxide and particulate matter, and slashes greenhouse gas emissions. USDA data shows that ethanol reduces greenhouse gas emissions by as much as 43% compared to gasoline. Next up on Agriculture Today, this week's edition of Tree Tales. Awaiting with that is K-State forester Jaron Tyndall. Jaron?
The most productive and diverse part of our landscape is usually right next to our streams. This is known as the riparian area, and its management has received increased attention in recent years due to the critical part it plays in water and wildlife issues. Vegetation has a major influence on wildlife use in riparian areas. The shade, detritus, and coarse woody debris provided by streamside vegetation are very important to healthy fisheries. Leaves, branches, and even whole trees uprooted by rivers or other natural forces become food and shelter for aquatic organisms. Logs falling into the streams often divert stream flow into new pathways, thereby increasing the complexity of the channel and helping to maintain a diversity of habitat niches for aquatic plants and animals. A multi-storied canopy of grasses, forbs, shrubs, and trees provides a variety of above-ground habitat for birds and other wildlife, and below-ground habitat for burrowing animals and soil organisms. Riparian vegetation can have a great impact on water temperature, which is critical to many aquatic organisms. Reduced stream temperature can increase a stream's oxygen carrying capacity. Vegetation shades the water from the sun, which is particularly important during the summer months. Organic material in the form of twigs, branches, bark, leaves, nuts, fruits, and flowers originating in riparian vegetation adjacent to the stream is broken down by aquatic microorganisms and stream invertebrates. Overbank flooding of streams and rivers also provides organic matter and nutrients used by aquatic communities. During periods of high water levels, rivers and streams expand into the adjoining riparian floodplain, picking up large amounts of organic matter, nutrients, and small organisms. When floodwaters recede, this nutrient-enriched water further supports the growth of aquatic plants and microorganisms. At the same time, flooding allows fish to migrate from the stream channel to feed and spawn on the floodplain. Riparian areas are unique in the way in which energy contained in organic matter is transferred from organism to organism. Energy inputs from riparian vegetation are closely tied to the productivity of in-stream habitats. That is, energy contained in organic matter in the form of fallen leaves, twigs, and other dead plant parts, when transported laterally into waterways, provides fuel for in-stream animal communities, both locally and downstream. As compared with purely aquatic or terrestrial ecosystems, organic matter produced in riparian ecosystems has the potential for supporting the diversity of food webs within the entire watershed. You've been listening to Part 3 of the Tree Tale series, Riparian Systems. For more information on riparian areas and their management, please visit kansasforest.org. This has been Jaron Tyndall with the Kansas Forest Service, bringing you another Tree Tale.
Thanks, Jaron, and we're looking forward to hearing from you again next week, right here. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This Agriculture Today concludes with our weekly Kansas 4-H segment, and it has been, in fact, a while, and we are overdue for an update from the Kansas 4-H Foundation, which is based at Kansas State University and is the supportive arm of the 4-H program in a very, very broad sense. The president and chief executive officer of the foundation is across the way once again, Jake Worcester. Jake, we haven't talked with you since you were first on board. Well, now it's been almost 3 years ago with the foundation, so how goes it?
Well, Eric, thanks for having me back. It goes well, and one thing that I know is always true and was true when I took the job and remains true today is the support for 4-H in this state is pretty overwhelmingly positive and outstanding, really. And I was asked the other day by someone who was considering coming to Kansas for a 4-H job, why should I come to Kansas and take this job? And I was really honest. I said, we have the opportunity here in Kansas to have the best 4-H program in the country and in the world, in fact. And 4-H changes young people's lives, and it changes our communities through those young people. And so we're really lucky. And since our job is to find more resources, find people who love 4-H. The fact that we start with that kind of foundation makes our job a whole lot easier. So we've had another good year. We've just really had an extraordinary time reaching out, talking to folks about the future of 4-H in this state, as we see our communities continue to be very supportive of what 4-H means, and really trying to drive home the message that we're fortunate that 4-H transforms young people's lives, but what that allows us to do is transform our communities in the state through those young people. And that's pretty fun for us, and hopefully fun for everyone else who wants to support 4-H. And we've had another good year. We intend to continue that momentum.
How support that is channeled through the foundation is turned around then to back various 4-H activities. This takes many, many forms, doesn't it, Jake?
It does. We support 4-H in a number of ways. And one thing that is important for people to know is that the primary funding for the operations of 4-H come through the university. And it comes from a variety of places, but through state support and federal support dollars at the university, that funds kind of the central and core operations of 4-H, both at the state level and then at the local level. It's funded through extension units, either through districts or through the single county extension units that are out there. That support is coming from both the county level and the university level there. And so our support has always been what I call at the edges and at the frontier. We're looking at how can we bring private resources to the table to help support the new initiatives that are happening in 4-H? How do we grow the program? How do we reach young people who haven't had the opportunity to have a 4-H experience? In addition to supporting some of our traditional areas, that includes Rock Springs 4-H Center. A lot of folks around the state are familiar with Rock Springs and what it means in terms of a young person's experience. So when it comes to getting away and going on that camp or conference experience, and that has to be something that we own and operate through the foundation. That's that's where a source of support goes, in addition to pilot projects, grants, other awards that we make to the 4-H program. Two of those have recently, in fact, two pilot programs have recently come to at least a phase 1 end, and now we're excited about going into phase 2. One has been an expansion grant program where we worked with 14 local units around the state to grow 4-H, both in terms of members and in terms of volunteers. And that just proved to be an extraordinarily successful program that we're excited now. We're in the phase of that program where we're talking about how do we scale it statewide? How do we help continue to support that in cooperation with the state 4-H program? The other initiative is reaching first-generation 4-Hers, new families, and that was piloted mostly in southwest Kansas with our Latino families, especially those that where parents weren't speaking English, and we wanted to find a way for those young people to have a 4-H experience and be invited in. We've learned a lot from that initiative, and we look forward to taking those learnings and applying it, not only to continue to apply it with our Spanish-speaking families and others, but also how do we take that into other areas of the state where we have new families to reach. And Wade Weber over at the State 4-H office is really excited about what we're doing in that area, as now we're talking about, okay, how do we reach into our Native American populations? How do we reach into more of our urban centers for families that haven't had that 4-H experience? How do we take those learnings and apply them there? Those are the kind of projects we're excited about funding, and we're continuing to reach out to find individuals across the state who know the value of 4-H and what it can mean to communities and want to make sure young people all across the state have that experience.
Well, Jake, here we are into December now. This is an exceptional time for those who have intended to lend their support to the 4-H program, haven't pulled the trigger yet here in 2017. Once more, the foundation is a nonprofit entity, so if folks put the pieces together, they might come to the conclusion that this would be a great thing to take care of as 2017 winds down. And this can be conducted a number of ways, right?
That's right. We just like any modern 501c3 charitable organization, we're willing to take support in a number of ways, and we want to make that as easy for folks as possible. And so one of the best ways you can do that is by visiting our website at kansas4hfoundation.org. You can Google us and find us that way, or put that right into your browser and find us. You can donate directly through the website if you're interested. We also, of course, we receive checks, and we're willing to work with you in any way possible to make that happen. If you'd like more information, you can find it on our website, or feel free to give us a call at the office, 785-532-5881, and we're happy to talk with you. One of the ways that we've really seen giving transform the foundation and in turn the 4-H program in Kansas is through estate planning. And so folks, in addition to giving annual gifts, and this is the time of year a lot of folks think about those, we've also had a lot of folks who have said 4-H meant a lot to them in their lives, or they've seen the transformation that's taken place at the local level, and they have reached out to us and said, I want to leave Kansas 4-H something in my will, or I want to find a way to leave an ultimate gift when I can't be here any longer, and that truly has been transformative for us. So everything from the annual gift that comes in now through that ultimate gift, through planned giving and estate planning, we're interested in working with people who want to transform young people's lives. And the best part about this job, I tell people, Eric, is, a lot of people think this is like sales. We're trying to pry people's dollars out of their pocket. The reality is we're helping people do what they want to do, which is give back, make a difference, and do that in a significant way. And we're glad to be able to help folks fulfill their wishes to make a difference in the lives of our young people and the communities that they serve.
And the starting point, once again, as you say, Jake, is kansas4hfoundation.org. Congratulations on a successful 2017, and wishing you the same in 18.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you for coming over. And featured on this week's Kansas 4-H segment, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Kansas 4-H Foundation, Jake Worcester. With that, our time is away for today. As always, thanks for being along with us. We'll return this same time tomorrow. Hope you will likewise. Until then, Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.